Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin playlist and the War in Ukraine playlist. Today I'd like to focus on the question, what is next? And the proposal that I will discuss is a missile strike to remove Putin from power. So, we start with the situation on the ground, and this is covered very well in a variety of sources, and the Western sources are much closer to reality today. And so I will not spend too much time on this, except to say that the offensive of Russian forces on Pokrovsk is heading on full speed, and everyone describing the bad situation for Ukrainian forces in this region. And on Kursk, again, there are many more voices now than a week ago that this was a gamble that probably didn't pay off. The Ukrainian offensive is stopped. The Russians are building fortifications. The breakthrough to the Kursk nuclear power plant failed, and in that sense, the Ukrainians simply extended their front line by about 200 kilometers without reaching much. Now, of course, what the Western media does not mention is that the political situation in Russia changed dramatically after the Kursk invasion, with an upsurge of patriotism, to which I'll come back later in this podcast. Now, the big question, of course, is what to do next in terms of this fiasco of Kursk offensive to bring Russian forces there and stabilize the front in Donbass. What to do next? I will focus on two responses. One is of Mikhail Podolyak, who is the assistant or advisor to President Zelensky, and Yermak, his chief of staff, who just went to Washington. This is the Ukrainian side. And then I will discuss with you a couple of articles and recommendations by US-Russia specialists. One of them is Atlantic Council, and the other one is from the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. So these are the think tanks, very influential, and they have some ideas as to what to do next. And this is what this video will discuss today. Now, as we all know, Yermak went to Washington at the beginning of September with a publicly announced list of targets that he had to hit in Russia as a kind of a new strategy to win the war, which I discussed last week. And the answer he received is no. The Biden administration did not want to go public with accepting responsibility for using ATA-CM, American medium-range missiles, into hitting targets deep into Russia. Now, probably this is a reaction to Russian statement that any attack on Russia with American weapons will be treated as an American attack on Russia, with the full consequences of that. However, the chief of European diplomacy, Mr. Borrell, raised this issue in EU, and they have actually split. Apparently, United Kingdom and France and Poland and Latvia said yes, these long-range missiles could be used. And then there are several countries such as Hungary, Slovakia, and Italy who basically said, no way, we don't want to fight a war with Russia. So this issue is beginning to split the fake unanimity of European camp members of NATO. But that's, of course, less important as to what the United States decides to do and what are the ideas that are floating around in these think tanks. So I will start with Podolyak, who is a kind of a most important advisor to Zelensky. And his idea is that what needs to be done is the spreading of the intensity of missile strikes. So he basically said that the United States should provide more and more weapons and more missiles, and there should be a massive strike on all kinds of targets inside Russia, the airfields and the production facilities and the oil facilities. And the purpose would be to create chaos in Russia so that the Russian population finally decides that Putin cannot defend it and overthrows President Putin. So that's the key. The key idea is maximum pain to Russia so that there is a social upheaval against the current, what they call Putin regime. That's very important because the Americans come to the same purpose with a different recommendation. So to have riots, to inflict pain, to destroy as much as possible with a massive attack. Now, before I discuss whether it's feasible, let's see what the Atlantic Council recommends is long-term financial and military assistance. So 61 billion is not enough. They're actually arguing to pass another bill before the end of Biden's term of unspecified number of billions to sustain Ukraine militarily and provide as much as necessary, as long as necessary. So same approach as before. Even though Ukraine is losing, they're pretty much saying more weapons, more missiles, and of course they also favor allowing Ukraine to hit deep into Russia. Now, the military question, of course, is it going to be effective? Is it possible? And is it feasible? And here are a few of my considerations. Is it feasible? Now, to be effective, you have to provide not one, not two, not a dozen, but like maybe 100 or a couple of hundred at the same time to really break through Russian defenses. Now, I don't know if this is feasible. I don't know if the United States has these kinds of numbers of medium-range missiles and how much they cost. But the example of the 1st of September strike, when 180 Ukrainian drones were sent to various targets in Russia following Podolyaka's advice, now the Russians claim that 98% of them were intercepted. Now, I don't know. There were certain targets hit in Russia and certain reports did appear. However, obviously that the vast majority of those drone strikes were intercepted. That it is one of the most effective air defense systems against incoming missiles in the world. So S-400 works just fine. And to launch 200 or 300 missiles at the same time would be very, very costly, and I don't know if it's possible. But even if they do, and even if they collect so many, and even if S-400 doesn't work, the question is, will it be enough to change the course of the war? And of course, my answer is with those who argue no. Even if they hit a whole bunch of Russian airfields, there are many, many others. And Russia has a huge store of unused aircraft and missile defense systems, so that even if they do, they will not be able to change the course of the war. But most importantly, of course, is political. Will it be enough to sow discord in Russia and anger against President Putin if this were to happen? Before I answer this question, let me move on to the recommendation of an article in the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. I will put a reference to it in the description so that you could check it for yourself. Now, and not to be accused of misquoting, I'm going to quote directly what it says. It says that what is needed is surprise uprising in case Putin suddenly leaves the scene, either naturally or by other means. So the authors of this article basically say that what would be nice if there was an uprising against President Putin and the people who are friendly to the West come to power in Russia. Now, when I read it, I could hardly believe my eyes that this actually appeared in National Interest, a respected journal in the United States. What does it mean by other means? To remove Putin by other means, is it not a call for terrorism? Now, how would the United States feel if there was a respectable journal in Russia that called to remove President Biden by other means or by a missile strike? Isn't that kind of beyond any reasonable discussion of how one conducts a war? But aside from that, what these people don't understand is the situation in Russia, and this is my field of expertise. This is absolutely ridiculous, stupid, and ill-conceived. The idea, as President Biden says, the very idea that they can actually achieve anything by removing President Putin is ridiculous, because they don't understand what's going on in Russia. They don't understand the mood of the people in Russia. Even if Putin just had a heart attack, the last thing that would happen is people friendly to the United States and the West would come to power. Absolutely not. After all these missile strikes, after the invasion on the Kursk, after all this military hardware provided by the United States, to expect that the Russian people are going to elect somebody pro-Western is absurd. The mood in Russia, for the first time in many, many years, is definitely anti-Western. Moreover, I discuss it in a greater detail in my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, where I talk about parting of the ways of Russia and the West, which occurred not yesterday, and it was building up ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union. In fact, the Russian people were more friendly to the United States during the Cold War than they are now. This is the cultural, political, military, economic, anything you name it. There is a kind of a growing separation of the Russian public opinion and views and sentiments from the West and from the United States. It has to do with woke culture. It has to do with military decisions. It's on all fronts. There is a kind of a bitter feeling that is expressed in a variety of ways, including some hotheads who are basically beginning to say in open media that if the French and the British send their storm shadows in Russia, they should receive a response in kind, and Russia should send their missiles on targets in France and Britain and Poland if it joins. So the question, of course, is that Kursk was in a way a gift to President Putin, because it is with Kursk that there was a huge upsurge in national patriotism. There are all kinds of gifts and clothes and food is assembled all over Russia to those who are evacuated from Kursk. It's just unbelievable upsurge in patriotism and support. Now, if they believe that President Putin is so unpopular, as some of the emigres are telling them, that all you have to do is just remove him physically and then there will be a revolution, it's so absurd. I can't even believe that they can seriously talk about this. The best way to describe the situation with President Putin is I would say, Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote a brilliant chapter in his book The Prince, which is called Is the Prince Feared or Loved? And that describes pretty much the situation. Putin is both. Putin is loved dearly by many, many, many millions of people, but he's also feared. Because he's a strong leader, and the Russians love strong leadership. The Russians really love those who know what they're doing, who have the confidence and who have the assuredness, and that is a part of Russian national heritage. So the expectation there would be some kind of a pro-Western revolution is absurd. Now, however, I want to add another thing, that Putin, in the political spectrum of views in Russia, is very much a moderate. Putin always talks about the possibility of negotiations, and we never are against negotiations. Putin is on record being for years and years repeating Minsk Accords are the only thing, there's no alternative to Minsk Accords. And then there was, which is to defend Donbass by the force of arms. So Putin is a moderate, and the Western hotheads should understand it. If they want any kind of negotiated settlement, it is with Mr. Putin. And if they remove him, of course he's so well defended that this is pretty much impossible, but by some miracle, suppose that they do manage to remove President Putin, what's going to happen? I tell you up front, a much more radical, angry, and anti-Western leadership is going to come to power in Russia, and they would be much less restrained to respond with all the capacity that Russia has militarily against those who did that. So this is a very dangerous game, and I hope that a more reasonable attitude prevails in Western capitals, and that the world will not plunge into World War III. Thank you very much, and I want to remind you that my videos are organized in playlists, and I mentioned just two of those, but besides that there is Russia under Yeltsin and Putin, Russia under the communist regime, Russian history, Western European history, and so on. Please subscribe to my channel and read my book, From Lenin to Putin, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.